return of subjectivity, the eclipse of self-consciousness. Phenomenology depends on the reality and the apodicticity of self-consciousness. The things and events we deal with and talk about have been overlaid with cultural interpretations, scientific elaborations, and philosophical interpretations. Things and events are to be reported, described as they originally appear, as they appear to observation, perception, sensibility, and some as they appear to consciousness. But if a conscious being is to report on how things themselves appear to that consciousness, it has to be self-conscious, able to intuit and reliably describe its experience. Phenomenology went further to argue that perception of objects involves not simply intuiting them, but ascribing unity to their successive appearances, identifying them, recognizing what class they belong to, ascribing meanings to them. The meanings originate in conscious acts. We can become aware of these descriptions in self-consciousness. More radically, self-consciousness is a condition for the possibility of objects and an environment appearing. Stretches of extension can appear as segments of a continuous field, environment, or world. Moments of time can figure as past, present, and future relative to one another, only if they are recognized to appear to one and the same consciousness. Patches of sensory appearance in successive moments of time can appear as unitary and enduring objects, only if they are recognized to appear to one and the same consciousness. And consciousness identifies itself as one and the same across time in self-consciousness. Ethics requires responsibility. That is, an agent that is reliably aware of his or her intentions, motivations, and initiatives, and can answer for them. Consciousness spontaneously produces self-consciousness, a production that would be possible at any moment. In Thousand Plateaux, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari elaborate theses that dismantle the classical conception of self-consciousness. The body is the locus of multiple drives and operations that are not launched from the self-conscious self and do not produce an inner sense of unity and identity. The environment does not consist of unified objects, but sites and streams of intensive forces. Speech acts are not representational, they are pragmatic maneuvers in the course of movements, operations, actions, and interactions. A body does not spontaneously attribute intentions, initiatives, or actions to itself, but does so when ordered by an outside force or authority. Thus, the speech acts with which a speaker may identify himself with the subject of his statements are not intuitive or representational. They too are pragmatic maneuvers commanded from the outside. Yet we shall see that self-consciousness reappears in Deleuze and Guattari, though in a different place, with a different origin, a different structure, and a different function. 1. Body couplings and their pleasures. Our bodies have been conceived as material systems where from internal combustion of energies, leakage, and evaporation, lacks are produced. These lacks, experienced as needs and wants, turn our bodies to the outside to appropriate the sustenance they need. They are the life that opens and moves these material systems. But needs and wants are not the essence of a living body. They are surface phenomena on the plenum of the body. They are superficial and intermittent. Deleuze and Guattari affirm that our bodies are zones where energies are generated, dynamos. We awaken because our bodies have recharged themselves, and we advance into the environment to discharge their excess energies. And it is because our bodies thrust their energies into the environment, run and dance, that needs and wants develop. The body's drives are multiple and couple onto multiple bodies, events, and situations of the environment. These are not objects posited over against the body and that are constituted as objects by consciousness. They are nexus of intensive forces and movements. And these couplings, the other animals, plants, roads, rivers, molecules, meteors, are symbiotically joined to the body, such that the body takes on something of their ways of moving and resting, reaching out and drawing back. An industrial worker takes on the movements and pacings of the machines, while machines are made to the scale and force of human bodies. A hunter acquires the sharp eyes, wariness, stealth movement, speed, readiness to spring and race, and the exhilaration of the beast he hunts, which are available for stalking prey, but also for gambling down the hills into the river, dancing and sexual contests. A forager is bent upon the earth, is herself imbued with the damp and smell of the ground, and acquires the patience of plants. There is symbiosis, for the prey animal contracts the speed and direction of movement of the hunter, and plants produce succulent fruits and berries so that they will be taken and their seeds deposited in new areas. Our bodies couple with the movements of the winds and the rain and the sprawling savanna, the frozen tundra and misty tropical swamps. There are movements that take on the movement of cells and molecules and scintillations of light. In the couplings that a body contracts with bodies and events of the environment, it releases excess energies. These releases intensify and turn in eddies of pleasure. These moments of pleasure are consummations and consumptions of energies. There are produced multiple, nomadic, transitory, ephemeral eddies of egoism on the surfaces of the body. They do not distance the body from its couplings with body situations and events. Picking up certain movements and rhythms and pacings of other animals, plants, rivers that connect with still others in the environment. A body slips into the midst of things, becomes a segment of the environment, which those in Guattari call becoming imperceptible. 2. Vital expressions and their pleasures. We pick up a hammer and soon are hammering with a certain force and rhythm. With the first few steps across a marble floor, a wet sidewalk, or a prairie, our bodies contract a gait. Vocalization, sighs, yawns, cries of surprise, alarm, fear, or pain recur with internal patterns such that other people recognize them to be expressions of our bodies, even when they do not see us and only hear them. So many of the movements of our bodies are dances and rituals in the bathroom, in the office, in the park, in places of collective assemblage. The body's gait sets in coordinating with the smoothness or roughness of the terrain, and once the rhythm sets in, it prolongs itself by itself. Our body catches on to the rhythms of music as we gesticulate in a car. In a walk down the sidewalk or through a forest, our gait spontaneously adjusts to that of our companion. Rhythms, genuflections, and dances of a crowd are picked up from and passed on to others during a ritual. There is attachment to certain zones and to certain patterns and rhythms of those places. We smile, frown, or leap for joy in a particular situation. We walk with a specific gait across the airport, another gait through the woods, still another up on the mountain. These expressive movements, Deleuze and Guattari point out, prolong themselves and limit themselves in specific disconnected places. They do not form a semiotic system extending over everything. The places, the terrain, are not simply material expanses. They are smooth or striated. They are empty or occupied by other bodies. They are coded with our inscriptions and those of our society. Running is natural, the pacing and speed determined by the anatomy and physiognomy, but walking is cultural. The gait is indeed determined by the specific anatomy of the person and by his or her present biochemical state, but it is over-determined by cultural norms imprinted in childhood, in office buildings, in churches and museums, and for different ages and genders. It is further over-determined by the body's present outlook upon the environment and his or her long-range goals and concerns. The cultural norms, the present attitude, and the long-range character structure are not meanings in the sense that words refer to meanings. They are intentional and referential structures embedded in the posture and movement of the body. Next time in an airport, sit on a bench and watch the people walking by. You will be struck to see how that each one walks in his or her own way, the posture and gait each time distinctive. You will see that in some people their gait expresses a self-assured, authoritarian personality, or a fussy, timid character. With most of them, the gait expresses multiple or ambivalent attitudes. These movements that connect up with patterns and rhythms of the environment do generate a sort of awareness of themselves. As we hammer the shingles on the roof, a rhythm sets in and our hand feels ease and pleasure in hammering. The pleasure is a sort of awareness the hand has of itself in moving, not an intuitive or conceptual awareness, instead an affective awareness. This sort of affective self-consciousness localized in the hand is not the origin or cause of the movement, but a byproduct of it. Bodies couple onto other bodies and contract certain rhythms in their movements that vary within a certain range and force. Members of a group are subdued, movements not abrupt, minimal, a relaxed feeling in the movements, picnics, outings on the beach. Members of the group are loud, their movements abrupt and forceful, an agitated, frenetic feeling in them, dance parties, games, sports. People tending gardens outside the city and associating with one another, barn-raising events in rural communities, so many primitive societies without rulers and hierarchies. Also, so many primitive societies described by anthropologists where activities are multiple and ambivalent, where work is ritual and play, where farming is coupling with plants and spirits and ancestors, and where elders speak with the wisdom of trees and clouds. 3. Passionate attachments and mirrored identities. It happens that a body attaches itself singularly and vehemently to a particular body. The Lezing-Guattari cite food for compulsive eaters, bulimics, and anorexics. A dress, lingerie, or shoes for fetishists. A domestic dog or cat. But we can say that anything can function as a point of passionate attachment. A landscape, an artwork, a song, surfing, or a butterfly collection. One can be passionately attached to the status quo, the system, the common language. The novels of Nathalie Sarraud present people passionately attached to commonplaces, truisms, bromides. A passionate attachment vibrates on itself with two poles and produces a specific sense of oneself. In one's attachment to a cat or a horse, one becomes for oneself a cat or horse lover. One feels the vital movements of cats or horses within oneself, and one senses one's own sentiments and impulses in cats or horses. A fetishist sees lingerie animated with his voluptuous languor and feels lingerie embedded in his own body. In passionate love, some trait of someone's face and movements, her smile, his eyes, her hands, his laughter, charm and fascinate. The beloved's face and expressive body cease to be surfaces where one reads for the possibility of objects and an environment appearing. Stretches of extension can appear as segments of a continuous field, environment, or world. Moments of time can figure as past, present, and future relative to one another, only if they are recognized to appear to one and the same consciousness. Patches of sensory appearance in successive moments of time can appear as unitary and enduring objects to describe its experience. Phenomenology went further to argue that perception of objects involves not simply intuiting them, but ascribing unity to their successive appearances, identifying them, recognizing what class they belong to, ascribing meanings to them. The meanings originate in conscious acts. We can become aware of these descriptions in self-consciousness. More radically, self-consciousness is a condition of, have been overlaid with cultural interpretations, scientific elaborations, and philosophical interpretations. Things and events are to be reported, described as they originally appear, as they appear to observation, perception, sensibility, and some as they appear to consciousness. But if a conscious being is to report on how things themselves appear to that consciousness, it has to be self-conscious, able to intuit and reliably, only if they are recognized to appear to one and the same consciousness. And consciousness identifies itself as one and the same across time in self-consciousness. Ethics requires responsibility. That is, an agent that is reliably aware of his or her intentions, motivations, and initiatives and can answer for them. Consciousness spontaneously produces self-consciousness, a production that would be possible at any The return of subjectivity. The eclipse of self-consciousness. Phenomenology depends on the reality and the apodicticity of self-consciousness. The things and events we deal with and talk